The ancient burial chamber stretched deep into the red rock of Mars, its walls covered in hieroglyphs that predated human civilization by millions of years. The Kepler Archaeological Preserve had been humanity's most significant discovery since joining the Galactic Council 3 decades ago. Deep within the tomb complex, Marcus Chen stood at his post, his weathered hands resting on the ceremonial staff that marked him as a guardian of the sacred dead. The 60-year-old former Marine had volunteered for this position after his retirement, drawn by the solemnity and honor of protecting something so ancient and mysterious. The beings buried here belonged to the Athuri, a species that had vanished long before humans had even developed agriculture. Their tombs contained not gold or jewels, but something far more valuable: knowledge. Mathematical formulas, star charts, and philosophical texts that had advanced galactic science by centuries when first discovered. Marcus wore the traditional Guardian uniform, a simple brown robe over his clothes with the silver badge of the Preserve gleaming on his chest. His duty was simple but vital: ensure that visitors showed proper respect to the dead and followed the strict protocols that protected both the artifacts and the sacred nature of the site. No photography, no touching of surfaces, no loud voices, and absolutely no commercial activities within the tomb chambers. The morning had been peaceful, with only a small group of Zephyrian students and their professor visiting the outer chambers. Marcus had guided them through the protocols, watching as their feathered crests bristled with awe at the ancient inscriptions. The young aliens had been respectful, whispering questions about human traditions of honoring the dead, genuinely curious about how humanity had adapted to become guardians of another species' legacy. But now, as the afternoon shift began, Marcus heard the distinctive hum of expensive gravitic engines echoing through the tomb's entrance tunnel. Multiple vehicles were approaching, and from the sound they were top-tier luxury transports. He checked his communication device and frowned. No high-priority visits were scheduled for today, and the VIP tour slots were all empty. The first figure to emerge from the shadows of the entrance tunnel made Marcus immediately understand the situation. Velkarn Thas was unmistakable even to humans who had little contact with the Corvani species. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, his blue-gray skin was perfectly groomed and his forearms were adorned with rings worth more than most humans made in a lifetime. His entourage followed: personal assistants, security guards, and what appeared to be a film crew carrying recording equipment. Thas owned the largest shipping consortium in the galaxy, with a personal worth that exceeded the GDP of most planets. He was known for his arrogance, his tendency to buy his way out of any situation, and his complete disregard for regulations that applied to lesser beings. The Corvanis. Yellow eyes swept over Marcus with the dismissive glance of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. You? Thas pointed one of his 4 hands at Marcus, his voice carrying the commanding tone of someone who had never been told no. Move aside. We're here for the private documentary. My production team needs access to the inner sanctum. Marcus stepped forward, his expression calm but firm. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see any permits for filming on today's schedule. The inner sanctum requires special authorization from both the Galactic Council and the Athari Cultural Committee. If you'd like to apply for filming permits, I can direct you to the proper offices on Europa Station. The Corvani's crest flared, a sign of irritation in his species. Permits? Do you know who I am, human? I don't need permits. I've made a significant donation to this facility. Stand aside. I understand you're an important individual, sir, Marcus replied, his voice respectful but unwavering. However, these protocols exist to protect irreplaceable cultural artifacts. The Athari entrusted humanity with guardianship of this site. I can't allow unauthorized access regardless of donations or status. Thas's entourage shifted nervously. They clearly wanted to be anywhere else, but their employer's reputation for destroying careers made speaking up impossible. The film crew kept their equipment running, apparently hoping to capture something usable for whatever vanity project Thas had planned. Human. Thas stepped closer, his massive frame towering over Marcus. I am offering you one final opportunity to step aside voluntarily. My schedule does not accommodate delays for bureaucratic nonsense. You are a maintenance worker in a tomb. I am worth more than your entire species' contribution to galactic commerce. Show proper respect to your betters. Marcus felt something old and familiar stir within him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced during his military service when facing down bullies and tyrants. The same quiet steel that had carried him through battles on distant worlds. protecting human colonies from raiders and warlords. His expression didn't change, but his stance subtly shifted, becoming more grounded, more ready. "Sir, I respect your position and your contributions to galactic society," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that could only come from years of genuine leadership. "But my duty here transcends economics or politics. I am the guardian of this sacred place. These beings died millions of years before either of our species existed. They deserve honor, not exploitation. I cannot and will not allow unauthorized access to their resting place." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of the film crew's equipment. Thas's yellow eyes blazed with fury at this unprecedented defiance from what he considered a mere servant. In his world, everything had a price. Everyone could be bought or intimidated, and obstacles were simply removed through the application of sufficient force or wealth. What happened next would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Felkarn Thas had built his empire through intimidation, manipulation, and the careful application of overwhelming force. In his experience, resistance crumbled when faced with sufficient pressure. The humans standing before him represented everything he despised about the newer species in the galaxy: their stubborn adherence to principles over profit, their irritating tendency to treat all beings as equals regardless of worth or status. Final warning. "Human," Thas growled, his forearms spreading wide in the Corvani gesture of dominance. "Step aside, or I will have you removed from this position permanently. I have friends on the Galactic Council who can end your pathetic career with a single communication." Marcus remained motionless, his hand steady on his ceremonial staff. Around them, the ancient walls seemed to absorb the tension, hieroglyphs depicting Athari burial rites watching silently over the confrontation. The film crew continued recording, their equipment capturing every word and gesture with crystal clarity. "I understand your frustration, sir," Marcus replied, his tone remaining professional despite the threat. "But threatening my employment doesn't change the situation. These protocols exist for good reasons. The Athari civilization left us detailed instructions about how their dead should be honored. Violating those wishes would be a betrayal of the trust placed in humanity." The human's calm response sent Thas into a rage that surprised even his own entourage. Throughout his long career, he had crushed countless opponents through sheer force of personality and economic power. Governments had bent to his will, rival corporations had been destroyed by his influence, and entire trade routes had been redirected at his whim. But this insignificant human, this glorified security guard, dared to lecture him about ethics and responsibility. Trust? Thas's voice rose to a roar that echoed through the ancient chambers. "You speak to me of trust? I have generated more wealth in a single fiscal quarter than your species has contributed to galactic civilization in its entire history. I don't need the permission of dead aliens or their human servants." With shocking speed for such a large being, Thas lunged forward and brought his primary right hand across Marcus's face in a devastating backhand slap that sent the human staggering. The crack of impact echoed through the tomb like a gunshot, and Marcus's ceremonial staff clattered to the stone floor. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth where one of Thas's rings had cut his lip. The Corvani's entourage gasped in horror. Physical assault was a serious crime under galactic law, carrying penalties that could destroy even someone of Thas's status. His security team looked ready to bolt, knowing that their employer had just committed an act that could land him in a council prison regardless of his wealth. The film crew continued recording, their professional instincts overriding their shock at what they had just witnessed. But Marcus Chen had survived too much to be broken by a single blow, no matter how powerful. He wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving Thas's face. Instead of backing down or calling for help, he did something that confused every alien present. He smiled. It wasn't a smile of humor or friendliness. It was the smile of a predator that had just been given permission to hunt. In the human military, Marcus had learned that there were times when following orders meant absorbing punishment without retaliation. But he was no longer a soldier following military protocols. He was a guardian, and the sacred trust placed in him had been violated by violence. "You know," Marcus said conversationally, picking up his staff and checking it for damage, "in human culture, striking a guardian in a sacred place is considered one of the most serious offenses possible. We have laws about that sort of thing." Thas, emboldened by what he perceived as weakness, stepped closer. "Your human laws mean nothing here. This is a galactic facility under Council jurisdiction, and I assure you my influence with the Council far exceeds yours." "You're absolutely right," Marcus agreed, still smiling that dangerous smile. "This is a galactic facility, which means it operates under galactic law, and under galactic law, you just committed assault against a designated cultural guardian in a protected archaeological site. That's not just a criminal offense, Mr. Thass. That's a Category 5 cultural violation." The blood drained from the faces of Thass's entourage. Category 5. Cultural violations were among the most serious crimes in galactic law, created specifically to protect irreplaceable historical and cultural sites from exploitation and vandalism. The penalties included massive fines, imprisonment, and complete exclusion from galactic commerce. Even someone of Thass's wealth and influence couldn't simply buy their way out of such charges. But Thass himself was too angry to think clearly. "You dare threaten me? I'll destroy you. I'll destroy your entire species' reputation in the galactic community. When I'm finished with you, humanity will be begging for the privilege of serving as janitors on waste disposal ships." Marcus's smile widened.
"I'm not threatening you, sir.
"I'm simply informing you of the legal consequences of your actions. You see, everything that happens in these sacred chambers is automatically recorded by the preservation systems. Every word, every action, every assault committed against a guardian." He gestured toward the nearly invisible sensors embedded in the walls. Full audio-visual documentation, transmitted in real time to the Cultural Protection Authority on Luna. For the first time since entering the tomb, Velkarn Thass felt a chill of genuine fear. The Cultural Protection Authority was one of the few galactic institutions that operated completely independently of political or economic influence. Their mandate was absolute: protect cultural heritage sites at all costs. They had imprisoned planetary governors, seized corporate assets, and banned entire species from archaeological sites when violations occurred. "But here's the interesting part," Marcus continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone as he dabbed at his bleeding lip. "As the assaulted guardian, I have certain discretionary powers under the Cultural Protection Accords. I can choose to file formal charges or—" He paused dramatically. "I can accept a formal apology and allow you to leave peacefully with a simple citation for unauthorized access." The tomb fell silent, except for the soft humming of recording equipment. Thass's security team exchanged worried glances, while his personal assistants began frantically checking their communication devices, probably calculating the potential damage to their employer's reputation and wealth. The film crew continued their work with professional detachment, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most expensive slap in galactic history. Marcus stood waiting, blood still trickling from his cut lip, but his posture straight and dignified. In his eyes was the quiet strength that had made humanity respected throughout the galaxy. The ability to absorb punishment and respond with measured justice rather than revenge. He wasn't seeking to destroy Thass, merely to uphold the sacred duty entrusted to him by a dead civilization and his own species. The next words spoken would determine whether a billionaire Corvani learned the meaning of human honor or discovered the cost of underestimating Earth's children. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Velkarn Thass stood frozen, his forearms trembling with barely contained fury, while his rational mind finally began to grasp the magnitude of his mistake. Around him, his entourage waited in terrified anticipation, knowing that their employer's next words would determine not just his fate, but potentially their own careers and reputations. Marcus continued to wait patiently, the picture of calm dignity despite the blood on his lip. He had given Thass a way out, a chance to salvage something from this disaster through a simple acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It was more mercy than the Corvani had shown him, and everyone present understood the remarkable restraint being displayed. You cannot," Thass stammered, his usual commanding presence completely shattered. "I am Velkarn Thass. I own shipping lanes across 3 galactic arms. I have dined with council members, negotiated treaties, funded entire planetary developments." "I'm sure you have," Marcus replied gently, "and I'm sure those accomplishments mean a great deal to you. But right now in this sacred place you are simply a person who struck a guardian and violated the rest of ancient dead. That's the only identity that matters here." One of Thass's assistants, a young Zephyrian female with brilliant green plumage, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "the legal exposure here is enormous. If the Cultural Protection Authority pursues maximum penalties, the fines alone could exceed 40 billion credits. And the commercial sanction, she trailed off, unable to voice the full scope of potential devastation. The film crew's leader, a professional videographer from the crystalline Vorthon species, made a subtle gesture to his team. They adjusted their recording angles, ensuring they captured every nuance of the confrontation. This footage was becoming something extraordinary, far beyond the simple vanity documentary they had been hired to produce. They were witnessing a collision between two very different concepts of power and dignity. Thas's chief security officer, a scarred veteran of numerous corporate conflicts, spoke quietly into his communication device. "Base, we have a code red legal situation, requesting immediate consultation with cultural law specialists." His professional demeanor couldn't hide his concern. He had protected his employer from assassins, hostile takeovers, and government investigations, but this was entirely outside his expertise. Marcus observed these reactions with the same calm attention he had once applied to battlefield situations. He understood that Thas was experiencing something completely foreign to his existence, consequences that couldn't be avoided through wealth or influence. The Corvani had built his entire identity around being untouchable, above the rules that governed ordinary beings. Now he faced the reality that some things truly were beyond price. "The apology option has a time limit," Marcus mentioned conversationally, glancing at his wrist chronometer. "Cultural Protection Authority protocols require that I either accept a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing within 5 minutes of an incident, or proceed with full legal documentation. We're at about 3 minutes right now." The pressure of the deadline seemed to break something in Thas's psychological armor. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time in the encounter, uncertainty flickered in his yellow eyes. Around him, his entourage watched with the fascination of people witnessing the impossible. Their invincible employer being held accountable by a simple human guard. "What?" Thas's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. What exactly would this apology require? Marcus's expression softened slightly, recognizing the first crack in the Corvani's arrogance. "A formal acknowledgement that you violated sacred protocols, struck a guardian without justification, and understand that such behavior is unacceptable in this place. A commitment to respect the dignity of the site and those who protect it. Nothing more complicated than basic respect for others." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Thas believed about himself and his place in the galaxy. To apologize would mean admitting error, acknowledging that his wealth and status didn't exempt him from common decency. It would mean treating a human, a member of one of the galaxy's newest species, as an equal deserving of respect. But the alternative was destruction on a scale that would make his corporate empire a cautionary tale told throughout the galaxy for generations. The Cultural Protection Authority had once dissolved an entire megacorporation for attempting to strip mine a protected archaeological world. They possessed powers that transcended normal galactic commerce and politics. As the deadline approached, something unexpected happened. The film crew's footage, automatically synchronized with their home network, began broadcasting live to their studio's emergency feed. The Vorthon videographer had activated a standard protocol for potentially newsworthy events, not realizing that the raw feed was being monitored by journalism algorithms across the galactic communications network. Within seconds, automated news services began flagging the footage as significant content. The keywords cultural protection, assault, guardian, and Velkarn Thas triggered attention from news organizations, legal analysis programs, and social media aggregators throughout known space. The confrontation in an ancient Martian tomb was about to become the most watched event in recent galactic history. Marcus's communication device chimed softly with an incoming priority message. He glanced at it briefly and saw notifications from the Cultural Protection Authority, the Mars Archaeological Administration, and what appeared to be several major news networks requesting statements. Word was already spreading faster than even he had anticipated. 2 minutes, he said simply, returning his attention to Thas. The Corvani businessman stared at the human guardian, seeing perhaps for the first time not just an obstacle to be removed, but a person with dignity, purpose, and an unshakable commitment to principles beyond personal gain. In Marcus's steady gaze, Thas glimpsed something that all his wealth had never been able to purchase. Genuine moral authority earned through service to something greater than himself. The next minute would determine whether pride or pragmatism would prevail, but across the galaxy, billions of beings were already beginning to watch the outcome with intense interest. The human concept of honor was about to receive its largest audience in history, delivered live from the tomb of a civilization that had been dust for millions of years before either species had touched the stars. With 30 seconds remaining on Marcus's deadline, Velkarn Thas experienced something he hadn't felt in decades: genuine humility. The weight of potential consequences crashed down on him like a collapsing star, but something else had emerged during the confrontation. In Marcus's unwavering dignity, even while bleeding from an unprovoked assault, Thas glimpsed a kind of strength that couldn't be purchased or conquered. Thas began, his voice barely audible in the ancient chamber. His forearms drooped to his sides in a gesture of defeat that his security team had never witnessed. I acknowledge that I violated the sacred protocols of this site. Marcus nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. Around them, the entourage held their collective breath while the film crew captured every word in crystal-clear detail. Unknown to those present, the live feed was now being watched by millions across the galaxy, as news algorithms recognized the historic nature of the moment. I struck you without justification, Thas continued, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. And I understand that such behavior is unacceptable in this place. He paused, struggling with concepts that were foreign to his worldview. I will respect the dignity of this site and those who protect it. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus studied the Corvani's face, reading the genuine struggle between pride and necessity. It wasn't a perfect apology, delivered more from fear than genuine remorse, but it met the minimum requirements under cultural protection protocols. More importantly, it represented the first time in living memory that Velkarn Thas had publicly acknowledged wrongdoing. Apology accepted, Marcus said formally. I'll file a citation for unauthorized access and inappropriate behavior, which carries a standard fine and a temporary restriction from cultural protection sites. The assault charges will be noted as resolved through formal acknowledgement. Thas's entire entourage sagged with relief. A citation was manageable, embarrassing, but not devastating. They had expected criminal charges, massive fines, and the complete destruction of their employer's business empire. The human's mercy was both unexpected and deeply appreciated, but Marcus wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Thas, his voice dropping to a tone that only the Corvani could hear. Mr. Thas, you have more wealth and power than most beings could imagine. But you just learned something that can't be bought, the value of treating others with basic respect. I hope you remember this lesson. Thas met the human's eyes for a moment, seeing not triumph or gloating, but something far more disturbing: genuine concern for his character. This wasn't about victory or defeat, but about fundamental questions of how intelligent beings should treat one another. The concept was so alien to his experience that he could only nod mutely. As the immediate crisis resolved, the broader implications were just beginning. The film crew's live feed had been picked up by major news networks across 3 galactic arms. Social media platforms were exploding with commentary as beings from hundreds of species watched and rewatched the footage of a human guard, maintaining dignity while being assaulted by one of the galaxy's most powerful individuals. Marcus's communication device was now chiming constantly with incoming messages. News organizations wanted interviews, legal experts requested analysis, and beings from across the galaxy were sending messages of support. But most surprisingly, the Cultural Protection Authority was requesting permission to use the incident as a training example for Guardian academies throughout known space. The Vorthan film crew leader approached Marcus respectfully. Guardian Chen, we were hired to document Mr. Thas's visit, but what we captured today is far more significant. Would you consent to our distributing this footage as a public service announcement about cultural protection protocols? Marcus considered the request carefully. Only if it's used to educate people about proper respect for archaeological sites and the beings who protect them. This isn't about personal conflict, but about preserving irreplaceable cultural heritage. Understood completely, the videographer replied. We believe this footage demonstrates something important about human character that the galaxy needs to see. Indeed, across known space, the reaction was becoming unprecedented. On the Zephyrian homeworld, philosophy professors were already incorporating the incident into lectures about dignity under pressure. Corvani business schools were requesting copies for case studies about leadership and accountability. Even the notoriously difficult-to-impress Arcturus defense corps was circulating the footage with notes about proper conduct toward cultural guardians. But the most significant reaction was coming from ordinary beings throughout the galaxy. The image of Marcus Chen, blood on his lip but standing firm in his duty to protect the dead of another species, was resonating with individuals who had felt powerless against wealth and influence. Social media posts flooded the networks with variations of the same theme. This is what real strength looks like. Thas and his entourage prepared to leave, their original purpose completely forgotten. As they walked toward the exit, the Corvani paused at the entrance to the inner chambers, looking back at the hieroglyphs that covered the walls. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was truly seeing the site not as a potential source of profit or prestige, but as something sacred that deserved protection. Guardian Chen, he called softly. Marcus looked up from his report filing. The beings buried here, how long have humans been protecting their rest? Since the site was discovered 32 years ago, Marcus replied. We were chosen as guardians because the Galactic Council believed humans understood the importance of honoring the dead, regardless of species. Thas nodded slowly, beginning to understand why the galaxy had entrusted this responsibility to such a young species. Humans possessed something that older, more advanced civilizations sometimes lost: the ability to find meaning in service to others, even when those others had been dead for millions of years. As the Corvani businessman finally departed, leaving behind only his citation and the lingering echo of an apology that had cost him more than money ever could, Marcus returned to his post. He cleaned the blood from his lip, straightened his robes, and resumed his vigil over the ancient dead. But across the galaxy, the story of the human guardian who had turned a moment of violence into a lesson about dignity was just beginning to spread. Within hours, it would become the most viral cultural phenomenon in galactic history, forever changing how beings viewed both human character and the true meaning of strength. Within 6 hours of the incident, the footage of Marcus Chen facing down Velkarn Thas had been viewed by over 2 billion beings across the galaxy. What started as an accidental live stream had become the most discussed cultural event in recent memory, sparking conversations about dignity, power, and responsibility on thousands of worlds. On the Zephyrian homeworld of Ethros, the famous philosopher Dr. Cathara Windwright paused her lecture on moral courage to address the flooding comments from her students. Class, you've all seen the human guardian's response to assault. Notice how he offered mercy before seeking justice. This is what we call strength through restraint, a concept that many species struggle to understand. A young Zephyrian in the back raised her feathered crest. Professor, why didn't the human retaliate? His species has a reputation as fierce warriors. Surely he could have defended himself. Dr. Windwright's own crest fluttered in amusement. Precisely the point. True strength isn't demonstrated by what you can do, but by what you choose not to do. Guardian Chen could have responded with violence, could have humiliated his attacker, could have immediately pursued maximum legal penalties. Instead, he chose education over revenge. Very human and very wise. Meanwhile, on the industrial world of Corvin Prime Thas's own homeworld, the reaction was more complex. The Corvani were a proud species, built on hierarchical business structures and aggressive competition. Seeing one of their most successful individuals forced to apologize to a human guard had triggered intense debate about their cultural values. In the capital city's financial district, junior executives huddled around holographic displays showing the footage. He actually apologized, whispered Zethak Vor, a mid-level shipping coordinator. Velkarn Thas, the terror of the trade routes, apologized to a human guard. His colleague, an older female named Sarthia, studied the human's face in the frozen frame. Look at the guard's expression when he accepts the apology. No triumph, no gloating, just professional satisfaction, as if making Thas grovel wasn't his goal at all. What was his goal then? Zethak asked. Protecting the dead, Sarthia replied slowly. He really meant what he said about sacred duty. It wasn't about power or personal satisfaction. It was about doing his job correctly. She paused, considering implications that challenged everything she'd been taught about motivation and success. I've never seen anything like it. The footage was having an even more profound impact on species that had historical conflicts with humans. The Rigelian Empire had fought 3 border wars with human colonies, considering them aggressive upstarts who needed to be contained. But in their military academies, the incident was being studied with intense interest. General Thoxis Krall, veteran of the Second Rigelian conflict, addressed his staff officers during their evening briefing. "I've fought humans for 15 years. I thought I understood their psychology. Aggressive, territorial, unpredictable. But this Guardian, this changes things." "How so, General?" asked his aide, a young officer who had never seen humans in combat. "Watch the human's body language when he's struck." Krall rewound the footage to the moment of impact. "See how he staggers but doesn't fall? That's trained resilience, military grade. This isn't some civilian administrator. This is a warrior choosing not to fight." The aide studied the footage carefully. "But why would a warrior choose nonviolence?" Krall was quiet for a long moment. "Because he was fighting for something bigger than himself. Not territory, not resources, not even personal honor. He was protecting the sacred trust of a dead species. That's a level of dedication we didn't account for in our strategic assessments." The conversation was being repeated in various forms throughout Rigelian command structures. The implications were staggering. If humans could maintain this level of disciplined commitment to abstract principles under direct assault, what did that say about their reliability as allies? Or their determination as enemies? But perhaps the most significant reaction was coming from an unexpected source. The Arcturus Defense Corps, the galaxy's most elite military organization. Composed of the finest warriors from dozens of species, the Corps had always maintained that humans were competent but unremarkable soldiers, lacking the specialized advantages of other species. Admiral Nexus Thrain, the Corps' supreme commander, stood before his senior staff reviewing the footage for the 5th time. His crystalline form flickered with the equivalent of deep concentration. "Analysis?" Colonel Vex, a Draconian tactical specialist, spoke first. "The human demonstrates exceptional emotional control under stress. Note the steady voice pattern even while bleeding. That's significant combat conditioning. But more than that," added Commander Sheila, a rare human officer in the Corps' upper ranks. "He's displaying what we call moral courage, the willingness to endure personal cost to uphold principles. It's considered one of our species' defining characteristics, but it's rarely captured so clearly on record." Admiral Thrain's crystalline matrix pulsed thoughtfully. "The galaxy is taking notice of human character in ways we haven't seen before. This incident is generating more positive discussion about humanity than decades of diplomatic efforts." "Why?" The answer came from an unlikely source. Lieutenant Corval, a young Zephyrian intelligence officer. "Because it's authentic, sir. Most species have seen humans in business negotiations, diplomatic meetings, or military operations. But this was just one human doing his job, displaying his true character when he thought no one important was watching." "Elaborate," Thrain commanded. "When beings watch this footage, they're not seeing human propaganda or careful political messaging. They're seeing what humans are like when they're just being human. Protective of others, committed to duty, strong enough to show mercy. It's not trying to impress anyone, which makes it more impressive than any official demonstration could be." The analysis was spreading throughout Corps facilities across the galaxy. For the first time, military professionals from dozens of species were beginning to understand why humans had been entrusted with some of the galaxy's most sensitive cultural responsibilities. It wasn't about advanced technology or superior firepower. It was about character. As the galactic day cycle continued, the footage spawned countless variations and responses. Artists created tributes showing Marcus as a symbolic protector of all cultures. Musicians composed pieces inspired by his quiet dignity. Young beings across hundreds of worlds began sharing stories of times they had chosen principle over convenience, using hashtags like Guardian Moment and Dignity First Strike. But the most meaningful responses were the simplest. Millions of ordinary beings across the galaxy watching the footage and thinking, for perhaps the first time, that maybe they too could find the strength to do what was right, even when it was difficult. The human concept of honor was spreading through galactic society like a beneficial virus, carried by the simple image of a bleeding guard who chose justice over revenge, education over humiliation, and duty over personal satisfaction. Marcus Chen had become the most famous human in the galaxy, and he didn't even know it yet. Marcus Chen discovered his fame in the most mundane way possible, while trying to order coffee from the facility's dispensary machine. The Thessarian technician operating the system, a normally reserved individual who barely acknowledged the human staff, suddenly straightened to attention when Marcus approached. "Guardian Chen," the technician exclaimed, his bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns that indicated extreme excitement. "You're the human from the footage, the one who faced down Velkarn Thas. My entire family cluster watched it 7 times last night." Marcus blinked in confusion. "Footage? What footage?" Within minutes, he was surrounded by off-duty staff members from a dozen different species, all wanting to show him the viral video on their personal communication devices. As Marcus watched himself bleeding but standing firm against the Corvani businessman, he felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and bewilderment. "I was just doing my job," he said quietly, but the assembled crowd erupted in appreciative clicks, chirps, and vocalizations from multiple species. Dr. Sarah Kim, the facility's human director, appeared at his elbow looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed. "Marcus, we need to talk. My communication system has been flooded with interview requests from news organizations across 3 galactic arms. The Galactic Council wants to award you a commendation, and the Cultural Protection Authority is requesting permission to create a training program based on your actions." "Training program?" Marcus asked, still processing the surreal situation. "How to maintain dignity and follow protocol under extreme pressure," Dr. Kim explained. "Apparently your handling of the situation is being called a textbook example of proper Guardian behavior. They want to teach it to every cultural protection officer in known space." The implications were staggering. Marcus had simply done what he believed was right, following the training and principles that had guided him throughout his military and civilian career. The idea that his actions could influence Guardian protocols across the galaxy was both humbling and terrifying. But the changes weren't limited to Marcus or the archaeological facility. Throughout human space, the effects of the incident were rippling outward in unexpected ways. On Earth, the footage was being shown in diplomatic academies as an example of how individual actions could influence galactic perceptions of entire species. Human colonies that had struggled with acceptance by alien neighbors were suddenly finding doors opening and attitudes changing. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, humanity's senior representative to the Galactic Council, found herself in the unusual position of fielding congratulations rather than complaints during her weekly diplomatic briefings. The Zephyrian trade minister, who had previously been cool toward human economic proposals, approached her after a routine session. "Ambassador Vasquez," the feathered alien said, her crest displaying colors of deep respect, "I wanted to discuss expanding our cultural exchange programs. The incident with Guardian Chen has sparked enormous interest in human philosophy and ethics among our young people. They're asking questions about dignity, duty, and moral courage that we hadn't fully addressed in our own education systems." Similar conversations were occurring throughout the galactic community. The Rigelian Empire, despite their historical conflicts with humanity, formally requested human cultural advisors for their military academies. The request specifically mentioned wanting to understand how humans maintained discipline and moral clarity under pressure. Even more surprisingly, several major corporations were revising their employee conduct policies, incorporating concepts inspired by Marcus's actions. The viral footage had sparked galaxy-wide discussions about workplace respect, ethical leadership, and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. But perhaps the most significant change was happening on Corvin Prime, where Velkarn Thas was discovering that his forced apology had consequences he hadn't anticipated. The Corvani business community, traditionally ruthless and hierarchical, was experiencing an unprecedented wave of self-reflection. Thas himself was sequestered in his private estate, dealing with the aftermath of becoming the galaxy's most famous example of power without dignity. His business empire remained intact, but his reputation had shifted in ways that couldn't be repaired through traditional means. Some called him weak for apologizing to a human, others praised him for showing the wisdom to acknowledge error. More disturbingly for Thas, his own employees were beginning to behave differently. Reports filtered up through his corporate hierarchy of managers, treating subordinates with unprecedented respect. Of workplace conflicts being resolved through dialogue rather than intimidation, of junior executives citing Guardian Chen principles in their decision-making processes. His personal assistant, the young Zephyrian who had urged him to apologize, requested a private meeting. "Sir," she said carefully, "I've been analyzing the company's productivity metrics since the incident. Employee satisfaction is up 17%, interdepartmental cooperation has improved by 23%, and voluntary overtime has increased by 31%. And?" Thus asked, though he suspected where this was leading. "The staff seems to be responding positively to being treated with respect rather than fear. They're working harder because they want to, not because they're afraid of the consequences if they don't." She paused, gathering courage. Perhaps Guardian Chen's approach to leadership has practical applications beyond archaeological sites. Thas stared out the window of his executive tower, watching the busy traffic of his homeworld's capital. For decades he had built his success on the principle that fear was more reliable than respect. That power came from the ability to destroy those who opposed you. But the human guard had shown him something different. Strength that came from service to something greater than oneself. The transformation wasn't limited to corporate environments. Schools across the galaxy were incorporating the incident into their curricula, using it to teach students about conflict resolution, personal integrity, and cross-species understanding. Young beings who had never heard of humanity before were now discussing human concepts of honor and duty. On the Thessarian homeworld, traditional poetry competitions were featuring works inspired by Marcus's actions. The crystalline Vorthans had created holographic art installations depicting the moment of confrontation, focusing on the interplay between violence and restraint. Even the notoriously isolationist Kepler Federation had requested copies of the footage for their cultural archives. But perhaps the most touching response came from an unexpected source. Children throughout the galaxy. Young beings from dozens of species were playing games inspired by the incident, taking turns being guardians who protected imaginary treasures from pretend bullies. Parents reported their children asking complex questions about when it was right to fight and when it was better to show mercy. Dr. Kim found Marcus later that day, sitting quietly in the outer chamber of the tomb, still processing his sudden celebrity. "How are you handling all this?" she asked gently. Marcus looked up at the ancient hieroglyphs on the walls, the same inscriptions he had been protecting when Thas arrived. "It's strange," he said slowly. "I keep thinking about these beings, the Athari. They've been dead for millions of years, but they're still teaching us things about respect and dignity. Maybe that's what this is really about. Not me or Thas, but the idea that some things are worth protecting even when no one's watching." Dr. Kim nodded, understanding why the galaxy had found something so compelling in this quiet man's simple dedication to duty. "The Cultural Protection Authority wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at their annual conference. Representatives from every member species will be attending." Marcus smiled ruefully. "I suppose I can't just go back to being a regular guard, can I?" "I don't think the galaxy is going to let you," Dr. Kim replied. "But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Sometimes the right person at the right moment can change how everyone else sees the world." As the Martian day ended and the ancient tomb settled into its nightly quiet, Marcus resumed his post. But now he carried the weight of knowing that billions of beings across the galaxy were watching, learning, and finding inspiration in the simple human concept that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect. The viral moment was evolving into something far more significant, a fundamental shift in how the galaxy understood the relationship between power and responsibility, carried forward by the example of one human who had simply refused to abandon his duty, even in the face of violence and intimidation. 1 year later, Marcus Chen stood before the largest gathering of cultural protection officers in galactic history. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive amphitheater on Luna Station, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity that still amazed him. The same footage that had made him famous played on screens throughout the facility, but now it served as the opening to his keynote address. "When I woke up that morning on Mars," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "I never imagined that simply doing my job would lead to standing before all of you today. But perhaps that's the point. The most important moments in our lives often come when we're just trying to do what's right. In the audience, beings from across the galaxy listened with rapt attention. The past year had seen unprecedented changes in interspecies relations, many directly traceable to what scholars were calling the Guardian Incident. Cultural protection sites throughout known space reported decreased violations, increased respectful behavior, and a new generation of young beings applying to become guardians themselves. The Athari have been dead for millions of years, Marcus continued, gesturing toward holographic displays showing the ancient tomb where it all began. They never knew that humans would exist, never imagined that beings from another world would become protectors of their rest. But they left us something precious, the opportunity to prove that intelligence and civilization mean more than just advanced technology or economic power. Ambassador Vasquez watched from the diplomatic section, reflecting on how fundamentally her job had changed. Where once she had spent her time defending humanity's right to participate in galactic affairs, she now found herself fielding requests for human involvement in cultural and ethical initiatives throughout known space. The Galactic Council had formally recognized humanity as a cultural stewardship species, a designation that carried both honor and responsibility. Near the back of the amphitheater, Velkarn Thas sat quietly in a section reserved for civilian observers. His presence had surprised many, but his transformation over the past year had been as remarkable as any other consequence of the incident. His corporation now operated under what employees called Guardian Principles, emphasizing respect, dignity, and service over pure profit maximization. Productivity had increased, employee satisfaction had soared, and Thas had discovered that ethical leadership was not only possible, but more effective than his previous methods. The question I'm asked most often, Marcus continued, is how I maintained composure when struck by someone so powerful. The answer is simple. I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about the trust placed in me by the Athari, by my species, by everyone who believes that some things are sacred and worth protecting. Dr. Cathara Windwright, the Zephyrian philosopher who had first analyzed the incident, nodded approvingly from her seat among the academic delegation. Her subsequent papers on dignity under duress had become required reading and ethics courses throughout the galaxy. The human concept of maintaining moral principles under pressure had proven to be a profound contribution to galactic philosophical understanding. What we learned that day, Marcus went on, is that true strength doesn't come from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to protect what matters most. The Athari trusted us to guard their memory, their achievements, their final rest. That trust is more valuable than any amount of wealth or political influence. In the military section, Admiral Thrain and his senior staff listened with professional interest. The Arcturus Defense Corps had quietly revised their recruitment priorities, placing new emphasis on moral character alongside combat effectiveness. The Chen Standard, as it was informally known, had become a benchmark for leadership under pressure throughout the Corps. General Kral, representing the former Rigelian adversaries, had perhaps undergone the most dramatic shift in perspective. The 3 border conflicts with humanity had been formally resolved through treaties that emphasized cultural exchange and mutual protection of archaeological sites. What had once been military tension had transformed into collaborative exploration of ancient civilizations. But the most important lesson, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger, is that individual actions matter. Every choice we make to show respect instead of demanding it, to protect instead of exploit, to serve instead of dominate, these choices ripple outward in ways we can't predict. The galaxy is watching not just cultural protection officers, but every being who faces the choice between right and easy. The audience erupted in applause, clicks, chirps, and harmonic resonances from dozens of species. But Marcus raised his hand for silence, knowing he had one more crucial point to make. I want to share something that many of you may not know. 6 months ago, I received a message from the Corvani Educational Authority. They're implementing new curricula based on what they call ethical leadership principles inspired by our incident. Mr. Thasi himself has become an advocate for respectful business practices throughout his species' commercial networks. Thas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, still not entirely comfortable with his newfound role as an example of personal growth. But the transformation was real. His forced apology had led to genuine reflection, and his business empire now served as a model for ethical commerce throughout Corvani space. This tells us something profound about intelligent life, Marcus continued. We all have the capacity to grow, to learn, to become better than we were. The choice between dignity and dominance isn't made just once. It's made every day, in countless small decisions that collectively define who we are as individuals and as species. Dr. Kim watched from the facility director's section, proud beyond words. The archaeological site on Mars had become a pilgrimage destination, with beings from across the galaxy requesting permission to visit the tomb where human character had been so dramatically demonstrated. More importantly, it had sparked a renaissance in archaeological studies, with young beings of all species inspired to become protectors of ancient cultures. In closing, Marcus said, looking out over the diverse assembly, I want to return to where this story began, with the idea of guardianship. We are all guardians of something, whether it's ancient tombs, living cultures, moral principles, or simply the dignity of those around us. The trust placed in us by others, by history, by the future, is the most precious responsibility any intelligent being can carry. He paused, thinking of the quiet tomb on Mars where this all began, where the Athari still rested under his protection. The Athari left us their greatest treasure, the opportunity to prove that death is not the end of influence, that dignity transcends species and time, and that the choice to protect rather than exploit is what separates civilization from mere intelligence. That lesson belongs to all of us now. As the thunderous applause filled the amphitheater, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. A simple confrontation in an ancient tomb had somehow sparked a galaxy-wide conversation about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of strength. The viral moment had become a cultural movement, carried forward by billions of beings who had found inspiration in the idea that doing what's right was always possible, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared to return to Mars and resume his duties as guardian, he received a final message that summarized everything the past year had taught him. It came from a young Thessarian student who had been inspired to apply for guardian training. Thank you for showing us that heroes don't need superpowers or advanced technology. Sometimes they just need the courage to stand up for what's right, even when no one important is watching. The galaxy is a better place because you chose to do your job with dignity. Marcus smiled, thinking of the ancient beings resting in their Martian tomb, still teaching lessons about honor and respect to species that hadn't existed when they died. Perhaps that was the real message of the whole extraordinary experience, that the best of any civilization, whether human or alien, living or dead, was the commitment to protect what was sacred and defend those who could not defend themselves. The Guardian incident had become legend, but its lessons were very much alive, carried forward by countless beings who had learned that true strength was measured not by the power to destroy, but by the wisdom to protect. And in a quiet tomb on Mars, the ancient Athari continued their eternal rest, watched over by a human guard who had kept faith with the dead and, in doing so, had helped teach the living what it meant to be truly civilized.